Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final general session of day 2 of our 2021 Women in Banking Virtual Forum. We hope you've enjoyed the conference thus far. Our final general session of the day is our fireside chat with Teresa Bryce Bazemore. And Teresa is President and Chief Executive Officer with the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. And joining her today will be Virginia Varela. Virginia is President and Chief Executive Officer at Golden Pacific Bank. And if you would like to ask any questions of both Teresa and Virginia during today's presentation, please feel free to type those questions in the chat box down below. And if you don't see that chat box enabled, please feel free to click on the blue button above that says General Session, and that should display the chat box down below. All right, without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Teresa and Virginia. All right, Teresa, Virginia, take it away.
Welcome to the Fireside Chat, where I'm here with Teresa Bazemore, and we're so excited to have her. Teresa just landed a great job, a very coveted position as the CEO of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. And I'm on the board of directors, and I must tell you all that we were so pleased to land her. She's a wonderful addition to the team. And Teresa, thank you for taking time out for this fireside chat. I happen to know that you're a very, very busy woman. And thank you for providing us some of your coveted time and being willing to share a piece of yourself with us today. So first of all, you have a tremendous background in a lot of different companies, experiences, and please just tell us about yourself from a career perspective. We all want to know.
Well, Virginia, thanks so much for the invitation to be here. And I'm thrilled to have joined Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. And it's been, I think I'm in week 3. And I'm really enjoying it. It's a great team, and I'm excited about the future. So in terms of my career, I started out as an attorney, and sometimes I call myself a recovering attorney. And but I started out in commercial real estate and in Baltimore, and I had an opportunity to work on a lot of public-private initiatives, to work on things like affordable housing. And it was really great, except I realized I wanted to be more involved in the strategy of a business. And so that's how I turned my career towards mortgage banking with a real focus on residential lending. And it's hard to believe that I've now been doing that for the past 30 years. I retired after 10 years at Radian, which is one of the 6 private mortgage insurance companies. And I was president of the mortgage insurance business for the last 8 years that I was there. Since then, I've been serving on some corporate boards, and including a large mutual funds complex. So that's been really interesting for me.
Well, I can tell you in the audience that at the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, there were many candidates for this position. And one of the reasons you were selected was because of your breadth of experience and also your knowledge of banking. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with banking, what drew you to that industry, and your thoughts about that as part of your career?
So as I was saying earlier, the commercial real estate was where I really started out, although I had some clients that were banks in that sphere. And I enjoyed working with some of my small clients that were in healthcare or doing other projects where they really needed both business advice as well as my legal advice. And I realized that for me, being involved in the strategy of the business was something that I was very interested in doing. And so as a result of that, I started looking at opportunities to get involved in other ways in the business community and joined the Prudential. So initially it was a large insurance company, but they were the 3rd largest mortgage bank at the time. And subsequently, I started going into the banking world. So right after PNC bought Sears Mortgages, if some of you remember when Sears was divesting so much of their business, I really got into that world of banking, working within the mortgage banking group. And after being at PNC for a while, I transitioned to Nations Bank, moved to Charlotte. They were in an acquisition mode. So it was a great way to sort of see the larger bank. And after I joined the bank, I had the benefit of being able to work with the community development part of the bank, as well as the fair lending part of the bank, and led the legal work for those areas. Nations Bank at the time was very active in doing its own community development in the bank footprint. So, so that was always terrific.
Well, Teresa, obviously you've had a broad range. What do you think about working for insured regulated institutions versus non-regulated institutions, the big and small? I mean, you're all across the board. So tell us about some of that breadth of experience.
Well, I would say, except for some of the being an attorney and working with clients, we're always regulated institutions. Everything has been regulated for me.
Yeah.
but in different ways, right? So for me, it's been a combination of federally regulated, right? So the OCC, Federal Reserve. When you think about some of the banks like PNC and Bank of America that I've worked with, but a number of the institutions have also been state regulated. So there's a big difference, right? You're talking about a large federal regulator that you're working with. When you're a state regulated entity and you're doing business across the country, you're talking about 51, because it includes DC regulators that you're working with. And the overlay in the mortgage banking field, you're always also looking at the overlay of having federal regulators over some of the work that you're doing, because mortgages are a federally regulated product, right? So it means working with the FHFA along with Fannie and Freddie. Even though they aren't regulators, there are a lot of requirements that are required to do business with them. So that's one of the things. And then on the small, large side of things, I went from an institution as large as the Prudential, or one as large as Bank of America, to doing a startup with a group of my former colleagues from the Prudential. And that was we were funded by KKR. So we had a great investment partner. But that's a totally different focus, right? When you're a large institution, you have the ability to say, oh, well, if there's something that happens and a loan doesn't meet the quality parameters, not that you want that to happen, but there's sort of this portfolio that you can put that in. When you're a small institution, you really have to focus a lot more on risk management and making sure that you're not making those missteps, because any misstep could have a detrimental effect that's much more impactful to you than if you're in a larger organization. You also have to learn how to be involved in a lot of different areas. So while in a large institution, you might collaborate a lot with people across the bank, you also, in a small institution, are sort of rolling up your sleeves. You might be involved in helping to sell to clients. In that particular case, most of our customers were banks and credit unions. So.
Well, what about the small versus the large organizations? Did you find that your experience in one type of organization helped you to proceed with how you would oversee and manage responsibilities in a different type of organization? So in other words, what skills and experiences transferred over for you?
So I think that being in the larger organization certainly gave me a view of a lot of different areas, because I was around people who were also managing other products. So while I was focused on mortgage lending, I was also interacting with people who were in the credit card space, or interacting with people who were in, say, the home equity lending space, or just in the deposit space. So it was a great opportunity to understand more about the entire banking product landscape. So that was a good part of being in a larger institution. In a smaller institution, I think I got involved in things that I would not normally have gotten as involved in a larger institution. So for instance, at Nextstar, which was the startup, we were building out a new technology platform. In fact, we built a platform where you could get approved or conditionally approved for a mortgage with, subject to verifying the information in 2 minutes online. This was way before Rocket Mortgage, right? And so I was involved in the technology and what we were doing. And I found that some of those things really served me incredibly well when I transitioned to a fully business role where I was running a company, because now I had been involved in a lot of different aspects of running the overall business that I would not have had an opportunity to do as closely if I was in a large institution still.
Teresa, I know you mentioned your legal background, and later you didn't really talk about that in the context of the regulatory environment, but how has your legal background added to your career experience, or can you tell us a little bit more about your educational background and maybe how that supported you as a foundation?
Sure. So I went to college at the University of Virginia. I'm a native Virginian and proud Wahoo. That's what we call ourselves. And then I decided that after growing up in Virginia and going to UVA, that it was imperative for me personally to go to a large city. So when I decided to go to law school, I set my sights on going to a large city, and I went to New York and to Columbia. And when I went to law school, I thought that I would maybe eventually be in a business role. I wasn't sure, but I thought that the legal education and how it teaches you to think and analyze issues would be beneficial to me. I also knew that I wanted to go into some type of business legal area. So certainly practicing law for a while, interacting with a lot of regulators teaches you a lot about how to communicate in a way that doesn't create ire. I'll put it that way, right, with the regulator, because sometimes they will bring things to you and they've maybe looked at the information incorrectly, or there's something that you've given them, but they didn't focus on it. And so you have to be careful, but you also have to take care of your company to make sure, well, did you look at this? We really think this is okay because of this. And that ability to talk to the regulators, I think then translates over, because then when you're in a business role, you're already comfortable with talking to the regulators. And that, I think, has been beneficial to me.
Teresa, you have this wide and impressive background, and there's many female bankers on the call right now that would like to know your thoughts on your experiences relative to them. Do you think it's useful to try out different challenging roles? And what would be your advice? Because obviously you've been motivated, enthusiastic, and given your all to every different position you have been in. How would you recommend that people keep up that pace and that intellectual activity? I mean, it's impressive.
Well, Virginia, I enjoy challenge. So that's one
obviously
motivates me. And I want the work that I do to have an impact in a positive way. So that's another important motivation for me. But, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that as women, we often don't raise our hand to say that we think we're qualified for something, right? If there are 10 things on the list of these are the qualifications, we'll look at it and say, well, I have 8, maybe 9, but I don't have 10, right? And many men will look at it and say, well, I have 6, I'm good. So we often to be better at feeling confident about our skills, and sometimes even thinking more broadly. I think sometimes if you step back and look at a particular skill that someone's looking for in a position, and you think back more broadly to your
Mhm.
experience, you might have that experience not just in your career or in the business sphere. May have picked some of that up. I know for me, I've done a lot of work in the nonprofit sphere as well, and I've learned a lot from that sphere.
Mhm.
So I think you also have to look more broadly and be willing to raise your hand. I heard some great advice years ago by the former CEO at PepsiCo. And she said that you should always raise your hand to be on a project that no one else wants to do. And I totally agree with her, because not only does it increase your confidence, but it gives you visibility across the
Mhm.
organization. Because if you can then solve something that's sort of, vexing for the organization, and then you can have visibility across as someone who is a high potential for the
Mhm.
future. And it's
Mhm.
and so I really encourage people to do that.
Mhm.
Also encourage people to get involved in their trade association, right? And because I think it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to learn what is happening in other companies.
Mhm.
It's a great way to network, and to have more relationships that you can potentially find beneficial in the future.
Mhm. Do you find that knowing more people in the industry and that working in different types of organizations has given you confidence moving forward?
It really has. And I'll tell you, sometimes I think it can be intimidating when you're new to something. I remember when I first got to the Prudential, and a couple of years in, I went to my first industry event. It was with the mortgage bankers, and it was a legal conference. And I remember thinking, all of these people seem to know each other. How do you ever break into this? But within a year or two, I was being asked to participate in the conference. And then the next thing I knew, I was on the leadership ladder for the committee. And then the next thing I knew, I was being asked to be on the board of the MBA itself. And I was the first sitting counsel. There were people on the board who had law degrees but weren't practicing. But I was the first sitting counsel to be on the board. So the general counsel of the MBA was so excited. But those relationships were really helpful. I mean, when we had our startup, those relationships were helpful in terms of the salespeople, even leveraging my relationships to talk to potential customers. And they would always come back and say, oh, so and so asked how you are. Or when I got to Radian, when we
Mhm.
were building out our customer base, and when I got there, many of our customers the focus had been on the largest 20 to 25.
Mhm.
And we were really trying to change that. I wanted to expand our customer base to include a lot more mid-sized banks, community banks, credit unions, and those relationships also helped, in addition to all the relationships I had with independent mortgage banks. So that was something. When I got involved in the trade association, I didn't necessarily know that it would translate out to me helping me build businesses later in my.
Mhm. Wow, that's great. And I know that at the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, you were selected from a large group of candidates based on your background and your experience. And I have an understanding of why we selected you. But when I think about it from your perspective, you had all kinds of opportunities. I know that you've had a lot of uh, organizations seeking you out for your leadership abilities. So tell me, what attracted you? First of all, congratulations on your CEO position with the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. And maybe for the audience, we could talk about why did you select that role of different opportunities I'm sure that presented themselves to you. And tell us a little bit about the FHLB of San Francisco and how that fits with your personal mission.
So, first of all, just to make sure our audience has a better view about the Federal Home Loan Bank system and Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. Congress established the federal home loan banking system in 1932 during the Great Depression to improve the nation's housing finance system by facilitating flow of credit for mortgages throughout the country. And so our purpose is really to make sure that we are providing low cost, easily accessible liquidity to our members, essential financial services and expertise, and the resources for affordable housing and economic development. So when you think about that, and by the way, the San Francisco Bank, we cover California, Arizona, and Nevada. So those are our 3 states, and we have 325 financial institutions within that footprint that are members. So when we focus on the mission, right? 10% of what we make goes to our affordable housing programs. And in fact, we've done some things outside of that, like sponsoring the Quality Jobs program, et cetera. But since 1990, when that 10% was put in place, we've now funded over $1 billion in AHP grants. So that's had a huge impact on families. 146,000 households have been benefited. So when I think about my career, and I've been very fortunate to work in a lot of wonderful places, for me now it's about the mission. And so what attracted me to the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco was the fact that the mission was very much in alignment with mine. I'm very concerned about economic instability that we see across our region, but across the whole country. When I think about the fact that so many people, I think 40% of Americans don't have access to $400. So not only do they not have $400, they don't have access to $400 for an emergency. That's something that we, along with our members, can work on trying to improve. And the affordable housing crisis continues to be a problem. More and more people having to use more than 50% of their income in order to have housing. So we focus both on home ownership, and we focus on multifamily, affordable multifamily. So when I think about that and how important those things are, and those are challenges that we really have to try to get our arms around and move forward on, that's really what was exciting to me about joining Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco.
Teresa, thank you for your background on that. A lot of people don't know who the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco is and what the system provides. And I really appreciate your explanation, because a lot of folks participating in this call are members and may not realize everything that it provides. But more than that, I love your passion. You're obviously well suited for the position. And, I'm wondering, it sounds like what attracted you to the CEO role at the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco is that it corresponds to your mission. I can just hear that passion.
Absolutely. There's no question.
So what are your initial observations? Now, you've only been in the role for 3 weeks with a board meeting and everything crunched in. How's it going for you in these first few days on your new job role?
Well, it's been going great, and I have to, say that I've enjoyed working with the team. I've enjoyed working with the board. It's I'm in the middle of week 3. Started to get involved in a few things before I actually was technically on board. I'm really starting to get my arms around where we are. It's great that the bank is financially a strong bank. And so while keeping it that way, my focus is on really kind of making sure we're moving forward on our strategy and our 2021 goals. And also making sure that we're relooking at the strategy and saying, is this what we want to do? And how do we make sure that we're fulfilling the mission? What are our plans to help address the wealth gap issues and the affordable housing issues? And how do we help with this home ownership gap, particularly as it affects some of the communities of color? When you look at the African American community or the Latinx community, there's a huge gap in home ownership, and we need to figure out how to do a better job at addressing that gap.
Well, Teresa, you're obviously going to have a lot of challenges along the way, but how does it feel to be interviewed and accept a position right in the middle of a pandemic and then start during this very strange period of our lives?
Well, it's really strange. And although it's funny because I know other people who've done the same thing. So, I mean, I think everybody's just making that adjustment.
Yeah.
Even the interview process was pretty much all online, right? And
Yeah.
so that's been interesting. And I still haven't been to the office, although I'm told it's really beautiful. So I'm looking forward to that. But more importantly, I'm looking forward to being in person with people, and having an opportunity. You can connect on Zoom. You can't connect the same way that you can connect in person. So frankly, I'm excited that I'm about to get my second vaccine. And so there'll be a little bit more opportunity to do a little bit more, and for me to get to San Francisco and see the office and start meeting a few people.
Right. And even in this fireside chat, I don't know if everybody on the phone can see you, but you're so vibrant, and your wealth of experience and your enthusiasm and passion is really coming out. So it's jumping out on Zoom, which is great. And so now that you've landed this job, it's a very responsible job. What are your plans for the near term, the long term? What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, a lot of it is about what I was talking about related to kind of affordable housing and the wealth gap and the community initiatives. But I also am starting to spend time with the team, spending time talking to our board members, and we'll start talking to members in addition to that. So I want to understand how we can continue to improve what we're doing for members. How can we bring more expertise and help? And are there products that we can be bringing that would be helpful? Because it's all about a partnership, right? I mean, we're cooperative. So we're really working with our members and our community groups to further the mission through our members. And so how can we be more supportive in that? And also making sure our members understand all of the products and services that we currently have. So, are we able to help them, and do they know everything that we can do to help them?
I know you're only 3 weeks in, and I know you had some assignments prior to starting on day one. And being the responsible superstar woman, you probably were, carefully studying and thinking about what you hope to accomplish. Is there anything happening in the first few weeks that are different than you expected, or any aspects about the organization that you feel are a little bit different than what you planned for?
I don't think so. Certainly, it's a bit more of a challenge, like you were referring to, when you're doing everything in a pandemic. And so it's harder to, be in connection with people coming in. But overall, no, I mean, we've got really smart, committed people, both in our management team and on the board. There's a lot to think about, right? That normally you wouldn't have to think about, like, what is our strategy for returning to the office? I turned after having my first board meeting really in the end of week 2, that was where my attention was. The first thing I was focused on at the beginning of this week was, what is our return to office strategy? And as part of that, it's not just about how do we return to the office, how are our employees comfortable coming back to the office? How do you do that in a phased approach? But it's also about flexible work arrangements. I think we all have to step back and think about, well, what is that sort of flexible work arrangement going forward? And when do people need to be in the office? And how often do they need to be in the office? And how do we do that in a way that preserves culture and promotes culture and collaboration and connectivity? You don't want to lose that. And the other thing that I think about is, as we bring in new people, how do they connect with the people who are already there? How do they learn how to interact with them? How do they have a chance to really understand the culture and sort of become part of the culture? So all of those things are top of mind for me in kind of the near term as we move forward. Something that I think the flexible work arrangement piece would have become more of a focus over time. But because we are where we are, it's a different focus, I think, than it would have necessarily been for me in my first month of being in a new position. But it's a critical piece of what we need to do, right?
Well, I want to pick up on that, Teresa, because when we were hiring you at the FHLB of San Francisco as a board of directors, one term that came up about you was your excellence with soft skills. And by that, it's your people skills. So there was an admiration about the way you can connect people and motivate people to work as a group. And without being shy, tell us more about your management style, and especially those soft skills that were so notably different from other candidates. We really appreciate that about you. And I think a lot of the audience on this Zoom call would be very interested to hear about that.
Well, first of all, I really believe that you have to be your authentic self. And I think that people see whether you are or not. And that is incredibly important. And I think you also have to make sure that people understand that you respect what they bring to the table and that you want to hear what their views are. So I really focus on making sure everyone's in the room, like every unit is included in the conversation, and that people feel comfortable disagreeing or bringing different views. And I also am open to, I can walk into the room thinking that I know what should happen. But then when I hear other perspectives, I may come out of the room with a different view, or at least a modified view of how I went in. So I think also listening is one of the things that I view as an important skill that I have. And then being able to sort of synthesize what I'm hearing to say, what's the best outcome? And then the other thing that is important from my point of view is to also communicate why I've decided or made a decision the way I have, and why I didn't use a piece of information or a suggestion, because then people feel heard. And And that's always really worked for me. You know, it's funny, even when I was practicing law, one of my business partners one time said to me, you know, somehow, even when you tell us no, we're like, oh, okay. And I said, but that's because I always try to find something that will work. You know, I would always ask, what are you trying to achieve? Because sometimes the idea that was put in front of me didn't quite work from a legal point of view. But often there was a way to reach the objective in a way that worked legally, and sometimes was a better option for what they were trying to achieve. So I said to him, if I say no, you know, it's because it's really no. I haven't been able to come up with another way for you to do this. So I think those things are really important, because I believe in looking for a solution. And, you know, and for me, it's outcomes based, right? Are we, making sure everybody's on the same page so that we can get to the outcome we're looking to achieve. And the other thing I think is that I'm fairly diplomatic about how I interact. So even when someone's saying something that really is sort of making the hair on the back of my neck stand up, I think I'm pretty good at being diplomatic in how I respond.
Teresa, I wish I could take what you just said, the last 5 minutes or so, wrap it up and send it out to the world. In our polarized political environment, listening skills, getting people together, explaining why you made the decision you did. I mean, that's just a wonderful skill set that is so precious during these polarizing times. The FHLB of San Francisco in our industry is obviously very lucky to have you, but I'd like to elect you to President of the United States, or a global position, maybe next term.
I think I'm fine at Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco.
My one vote, but yeah, that's wonderful. And I wanted to also go back to another thing that you were sharing earlier about why you were attracted to the CEO role at the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco. You were talking about affordable housing and the importance of it in our society. And you got very excited when you talked about the inequities of people in our great nation. And tell us a little bit more about that value set to you and how that works in with the role you're taking at the FHLB of San Francisco.
So when you think about the mission, right, of the FLB San Francisco, we really are, you know, looking at how do we improve our communities? How do we help, not just with affordable housing, although that's a huge part of it, but how do we help with down payment assistance? How do we help small business owners? You know, I've seen over the course of my career the impact that it has for, you know, to help people get in homes. One of the nonprofits that I've been involved with over the years was Habitat for Humanity. And when I started out working with Habitat, I was actually going to bills every few Saturdays.
Going to builds?
Call them bills.
You mean like hammer and nail builds?
Yes. And my father used to get a kick out of it, because I would call him and say, yeah, you know, I put up insulation, or one time I was digging a window well. I don't think you could get me to dig anything at my own house, but I was. And so I started out doing that. And then as I was involved with the mortgage bankers, we had a partnership with Habitat. So I was involved on a more strategic level, but we used to sponsor bills. And I would go to some of those bills as well. And I remember the current CEO of the mortgage bankers, Bob Brookschmidt, and I were working on a house together in the Washington, D.C. area, and we were building stairs. And sometimes I worry about those stairs, and whether an inspector looked at them. And then my husband and I started being a real supporter of the Habitat of Humanity in Montgomery County, which Pennsylvania, which is where we lived, and particularly with a focus on his hometown within that county. So and so when you go to those types of events and the family comes and you see the joy on the faces of the family and the joy on the faces of the children, and that it's not just about that structure, it's about a place to call home, right? It's about what that means for the future of those kids and having a more stable environment. So when I think about that, and I think about Federal Home Loan Bank San Francisco's role in doing that, I just think about how can we work with so many of the other great companies, government officials, and others who want to really make a difference here. I mean, I think we've done some things around the edges. We've made some progress, certainly, over the years, but we've also seen what can happen when there's a great recession and it erases a lot of the progress that we've made. Or there's a pandemic and we still don't know what the real impact is going to be on home ownership and homelessness as a result of the pandemic that we're still coming out of. And so I really want to turn our attention to not only supporting the programs we do, looking for an expansion of what we do, and looking for some of the shorter term things that can help people on the ground now, but also thinking about how do we do this maybe a bit differently in the future? And are there other ways that we can help people, whether it's home ownership, affordable multifamily housing, helping small businesses so that it's sustainable going forward. And it's less apt we're less apt to see a reversal of that when we have some type of economic problem.
And what's your style on leading the staff? I mean, you're very excited. I don't know if I'd want you to build my stairs, but
yeah, you wouldn't.
We all have our roles to play, and obviously yours is a leadership role. So you may not build the stairs, but how do you motivate and lead the people of the FHLB of San Francisco to move forward in that direction? And you could give them instructions and a blueprint, but how do you really get your folks, including board members such as myself, to follow and to really get excited about where we're going as an organization?
So, I hearken back to my time at Radiant, right? And when you think about mortgage insurance, some people, I think the people who are watching this will know what that is, but a lot of people don't even know what that is, right? And I used to talk about it as a product that enables people to get in homes with less than a 20% down payment, and that really allows for affordable home ownership. Because if you're someone working at the company, right, you want to feel like the work has an important purpose. And so when I think about leadership at this bank or anywhere, it's about how are we trying to make a difference as a company, and making sure that I'm communicating with the employees, the leadership team, the board, our other stakeholders and partners, what that is. And I found that was very impactful for people in terms of motivating them and feeling like it's purposeful, because more and more, I think people are looking for that. They're looking in their world, their work world, to know that there's a purpose behind what they're doing. And so that's how I think about it in terms of motivating people. And then making sure that we've thought through what the strategy is of how to get there, and that we're communicating the strategy. What I learned a while ago was, I think there's a tendency, you have your strategic planning meeting, you do the strategy, you maybe communicate it once. What I've learned is that you have to keep communicating it, right? Or else it's easy to sort of say, okay, yeah, I got it. But then if you don't keep talking about it, and it's important to keep talking about, and important to talk about how each person's job connects back to that, and have them think about that. Those are all, I think, important parts of being a good leader, and a leader that gets to successful outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And Teresa, one thing I've noticed in your 25 plus years of experience, you've really been able to lead the band in so many ways with really detailed business planning and business resumption planning. And I mean, when we talked before this fireside chat once in preparation, I learned so much from you just telling me about your perspective of when running a business, how do you plan for success? And can you share some of that with our audience? Because I found it highly fascinating.
So I'm a huge believer in strategic planning, and I don't believe that you do it and you put it in a nice little binder and stick it on a shelf, because then it's really not useful. So my approach to strategic planning is to make sure that all of the constituencies are in the room. So when I say that, when I was running a large business, but there were other groups within the corporation that I worked with, and I included as part of my team, but that didn't necessarily report to me, I made sure they were all in the room. So whether that was legal or internal audit or finance or HR, to make sure that we were all in the room so that we could all give our perspectives about things. One of the things that I learned when I was at the startup was sometimes the CEO would get frustrated because he felt that we weren't getting things accomplished as quickly as we could. And my perspective was that we didn't have a clear focus on what the most important priorities are. And that's one of the things that you get if you do strategic planning the right way. So I learned from someone who was doing strategic planning many years ago. He was at Monsanto, and we were on a nonprofit board together. So I learned this from him in that context. But I've used a process called spin the dime. And
Spin the dime.
Spin the dime, not my name, that was his. And so you get everybody together, you talk, you do the SWOT analysis, you look at the landscape, what's going on in the economy, but then you just brainstorm, and everybody sort of just puts up their ideas about what should we be doing. And it could be operational improvements, it could be, new products and programs, it could be anything. There's no bad idea, just ideas to put up. And then each person in the room, no matter what your job, what your level, you get a dime to spend. And you go up and you basically give your dime to whatever ideas. If you like one idea, you can spend 10 cents on it. Or you can spend 5 cents on this one and 3 cents on this one. And invariably, and I've now used this many times, and it's a simple process that any company can use, no matter how small or large you are. And always the top 4 to 5 things are always far at the top of the list. They always get the most votes. But what's important about that is that everybody walks out of the room on the same page about the most important things. And I remember having this discussion with that CEO at the time and convincing him to let me do this with the team. And his initial concern was that if we told people what the most important things were, they wouldn't work on other things. And my view was that if you have the right team, that won't happen. And my other view was that if I'm working on priority number 7, and now number 1 comes across my desk and I need to do something to advance number 1, if I know that's number 1, I'm going to put 7 to the side for a moment and do what I need to do to advance number 1. So number 1 is getting done. But if everybody doesn't know what number 1 is and what number 2 is and what number 3 is, they may decide that number 7 is more important than personally to them, or what they're given their sphere of influence or sight across the company. And so that's how I focused on strategic planning. Then the second piece that I brought in when at the early part of the financial crisis was scenario planning. So scenario planning is where you take different ways that things could go in the future, and you sort of pick 2 levers that, so it could be something happening in the economy, it could be, but you take 2 things and you basically end up with a 4 box. So there are 4 ways that these things could go. And then you decide what's most likely, what's next most likely, what's probably unlikely. And you test your strategy against that so that you can see what would you do differently, or would you do anything differently if those things occurred. And then if there is something you would do differently, what do you monitor to figure out if those things are on the horizon, if those scenarios are on the horizon, so that you can then start changing your strategy appropriately. So that's sort of how you can tell I really love the strategic planning, scenario planning stuff, but I found it to be incredibly helpful.
And how does data fit into all of this? What resources do you use to support whatever decisions you make, including input from your constituents?
So data is incredibly important. And I remember when I first got to Radian, and about 4 months in, I also took over all of the risk responsibilities. And that was a lot, given the fact that we were a risk, that was our business, was to take risk, not just in the mortgage insurance business, but we also had a financial guarantee business at that time. And so, but what would happen is I get these huge decks of lots of data, and I'd walk out with an 80-page deck, and I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? And I realized that what I needed was a different way of looking at the data, and folks that could really analyze the data and say, what are we learning from it? What trends are we seeing? And so we made some changes to our data group, and then started seeing what was happening. So for instance, back in early 2008, even though we were being told in 2007 that some of our customers were making changes in their underwriting and that we should start seeing some improvement in the quality of the loans that we were insuring, by the time we got to the spring of 08, we still weren't really seeing that. And using data and looking at what was going on, we started to understand that in the early part of 2008, there were customers who were underwriting mortgage loans, and up to 10%, sometimes 11% of them were defaulting in the first 6 months. Can you imagine that? Not even the first 12. And it became clear that some places just couldn't get this right. And that we had to make some difficult decisions about who we were going to do business with going forward. And we were willing to work with customers to move the needle in the right direction, but they had to be willing to work with us, and we had to see that improvement going forward. But the same way that helped us then, and also how we thought about our own underwriting guidelines and what we needed to change. But on the flip side of that, the data also helped us understand when there was an opportunity to expand things. So for instance, we, at one point during the crisis, or sort of the end of the crisis, we had already gone to loans having to be again 5% down. And while 5% doesn't sound like a lot, when you add the closing costs in, it's still a lot. And we had been doing 3%, and I wasn't advocating for going back to 100% or anything like that. But excuse me, the data showed us that 3% down loans performed pretty much the same as 5% down loans.
Mm-hmm.
We're able to take that data and share it with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the FHFA and our regulators and get to an agreement that yes, we can now go to 3% down loans, which meant that more people would have an opportunity to have home ownership, but still in a sustainable way. So data, but the ability to really analyze the data and harness it can be very helpful in making decisions about what you should do, is it working, and what are the opportunities going forward.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And how did you learn your methods and figure out what worked and what didn't?
Probably a bit of trial and error. But you know what? You have to be open to trying new things, because sometimes, and our world is changing so much.
Yeah.
So you have to constantly be looking ahead and saying what's going on. Sometimes I listen to people who call themselves futurists, right? And sometimes I'm like, is this really helping me? I don't know. But having said that, I think it's more about the openness of understanding that things don't stay where they are. And you have to constantly be thinking about what's coming. And are we making the changes that are necessary to still have an impact with what's coming in the future? And maybe to help facilitate what's coming in the future to be the right thing. And so I look at it that way. But I think you have to be willing to try something and it doesn't work. But I also think you have to be willing to look at something that doesn't work and say, you know what, I tried that, it doesn't work, let's move on, and not get so wed to it that you can't walk away.
And how would you describe yourself as a leader in terms of making a business decision? Are you an information gatherer? Obviously, you're very involved in strategic planning and built in some flexibility, but tell us a little bit about how do you make decisions?
So one of my former employees it was funny. He said to me one day, when we're preparing to meet with you, I always say, well, what questions is she going to ask? And I realized maybe I'm going back to the Socratic method. I don't know, from law school, but I am an information gatherer. Having said that, I don't feel like I need to have every last scintilla of information, because sometimes when you try to do that, you never get to a decision, and that has an impact in and of itself. But I try to make sure I'm understanding all of the important aspects of something and how certain things could play out in different ways and what it would mean to our stakeholders. And so I do ask a lot of questions, and sometimes that means having to do a little bit more work for people who are working with me to get to that point. But once I do that, I usually feel pretty confident about making a decision. And I'm usually not reluctant to make a decision. But some decisions I may take a little bit more time with than others. But for instance, the team has been terrific in terms of what work they've done on some of the return to work strategy. So when I sat with them, there was a ton of great information already, but I had an opportunity to ask some questions, probe some more, but it put me in a position to really come out of that meeting making some initial decisions that needed to be made. So I just want to feel like I have a really good view of the landscape and what the implications of a decision are going to be. And then I'm comfortable making the decision.
Well, what I'm hearing is you have a lot of roots in collaboration, and that gets you, further down the line as far as engaging those that will assist you. I love that approach. I'm learning so much from you.
It makes a difference because you can't know everything, right? You just can't know everything. And, I might be an expert in this, but you're an expert in something else, right? Mm-hmm. And if we put our expertise together, we're certainly going to come out with a better solution.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this is so great. We're so lucky to have you in our industry. And talking about engaged employees, do you think that engaged employees add to better customer service?
Absolutely. And there's so much out there in terms of research where, I think we've known that for years, in terms of the business community, but I'm not sure everybody always practices it, right? And what you want people who are happy to be at work and feel engaged and feel valued. And then that translates over to how they treat our customers and our members, our community organizations. I think that becomes incredibly important, but I don't think it matters what company you're in. In fact, there's a book called The Fish Book. Have you ever heard of The Fish Book?
No. Is it a Dr. Seuss book?
It's not a doctor, but I guess it could be. But it's The Fish Book. It's a very short book, but it's about the Pike Place Fish Market in Seattle.
Oh.
And so think about it. These guys are in a smelly fish market all day, throwing fish around for the entertainment of, and they love their jobs. Yeah. Right? So, if you can motivate people in a fish market to love their jobs, I think you can motivate people in a business environment where you're trying to have a good culture to love their jobs and do the right thing for the customer.
We're going to start tossing fish from one cubicle to the next.
It's a plastic fish. They don't smell so good.
Oh, Teresa, this is so much fun talking to you. We're kind of nearing the end of our fireside chat, but sort of as a bonus wrap-up question, I'd love to know, what career achievement are you most proud of and why?
I'd have to say it is leading Radian through the financial crisis. And, when I got there, I really joined as the GC of the business, the general counsel, and corporate secretary. As I said, I picked up risk about 4 months into it, and then became the president of the mortgage insurance business, which represented about 80% to 85% of the revenues after I'd been there a little less than 2 years. And this was right in July of 2008. So we all know what was going on then. And there was a lot of questions about whether or not the company would survive. And typically you're in sort of survival mode, maintenance mode, or growth mode. And what I was able to achieve was being in survival mode and growth mode at the same time. And so I'm incredibly proud of that, and incredibly proud of the folks that I was working with there. I brought in a new head of sales who was phenomenal, and we built out the sales force. We, as I talked about, increased what we were doing, not only with the large customers, but we also started doing a lot more with community banks and credit unions and other independent mortgage bankers. And we helped grow our way out of the problem, right? I mean, so you have to be realistic about what you're facing. And I think, when we're talking about employees appreciate that when you don't try to sugarcoat where we are, but you talk about what the challenges are and how we're addressing them, which is the other important part of that, right? And so, we had to manage the challenges, and they were coming one after the other. But at the same time, we made sure we were spending some of our time focused on growing the business. And that included me spending time going out, meeting with customers, speaking at conferences, doing all those kinds of things to connect with customers. And so that in coming out of it, where Radian had a larger market share than when it went into the crisis, was stronger financially and so forth. That all felt really good to me in terms of navigating something like that. The other thing is that we spent a lot of time, in addition to that, helping our customers understand what was going on in terms of how the population in the US was changing demographically and what they could do. We tried to bring resources to them to help them understand how to broaden their customer bases so that they also had more business. And our position was always, if we can help you do more, then as your partner, we hope that means we will do more with you. And that was the approach we took. So definitely getting through the financial crisis and being in a better place on the other side of it was, I think, the top one.
Mhm. Wow. Teresa, you have such an impressive background and a way about you and a spirit that just makes me want to do whatever you want. You're obviously a great leader. I love this collaborative spirit and your approach, and thank you for sharing with us your decision making, your business planning, and the dime method. And this has been a great chat. I've learned so much. And on behalf of the Western Bankers Association, the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and all the folks on the phone on the Zoom call right now, all the participants, we welcome you as a professional woman in banking to the West Coast. And I'm just looking forward to watching you lead us. And thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Virginia, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
All right. Thank you very much, Teresa and Virginia, for a great fireside chat. We really enjoyed that and hope everyone else enjoyed that as well. Please feel free to provide your feedback by filling out the speaker survey in the WBA mobile app. We'd love to hear your feedback, so thank you very much. All right, well, that concludes day 2 of our 2021 Women in Banking Virtual Forum. Hope everyone's enjoying themselves. And just want to remind everyone that you can watch this session along with all of the rest of our other sessions on demand. And you can find that in the tab up above that says On Demand Video. And all of these presentations will be available on demand 24 hours after they first air, and they will be available for 90 days thereafter. So feel free to take a look at any of those on-demand videos and take a look and watch those at your own time whenever you'd like. All right, well, that concludes and that wraps up day 2 of our Women in Banking Virtual Forum. Hope everyone's enjoying it. And we'll resume back here tomorrow morning, which is Thursday, April 8th at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. Have a great evening, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone.